So I've got this scene, it's all in diffuse grey. Vicky's come over the DAS Studio bridge. Those other things were made in Wings 3D, and there's a tutorial that explains how to make those two-part boxes. But in this video, I'm going to experiment with high output diffusion, because that's what I've been thinking about. I've got this function that allows you to produce a very high output. What use can it be put to? So I've got default sky and default grey materials. I'm going to look at the materials. I've got everything selected. Go into the material lab. Right, what is a maximum diffuse under normal circumstances we can get out? So we've got fully white and maximum diffusion. And when you've got that under normal circumstances, this is the effect you get under the default sky. I'm going to modify the sky now and turn the atmosphere off, set it to fully black, and disable the sunlight. And then look at setting up for True Ambience rendering. So that's premium effects. I'm going to turn the raise pixel down to 4 for previewing, select True Ambience scatter correction. I'm avoiding boost light because that's going to give me too much noise, and I'm turning the ray depth down to 4. Now the ray depth is going to be critical in this case. So now under these circumstances we get fully black, which is what I was looking for. And then if I go into the material and provide some ambient output, so I've just given it full ambient, we've got full white channel there, then you see we've just got some grey and some white areas. Now those white areas are being caused by the diffuse response and the light gathering method, which is getting trapped between these objects, and the diffusion's responding with the lit material being lit through the global ambience channel here. So this is creating a different kind of effect. So it looks a bit like a negative image, and I got to thinking, what if I reduce this light output here and then render it, you can see it's all getting a bit dark, and this is turning from white to grey. But if I could increase the diffuse response using a high power output function, then I could make it respond to very low levels of ambient light and create a very high contrast negative image effect. And then I could swap that round in a paint package to a positive image and see if that looks any different from lighting from the outside with diffuse. So as I say, an experiment. So let's get cracking. So in the materials, I'm going to need something here in this channel to drive the diffusion above 100, because I can't enter a higher value. It doesn't let me. You can do that in bump height, but you can't do that with diffusion. So I've put a blob in here, and then I'm going to go into the texture source library. So I'm going to hold the shift key down and get from here, from the basic selection, I'm going to use this check blue, because I know that in the case of the check blue function, sorry, I've had to go in and out because of Camtasia Studio. In the case of the check blue function, if I go into the texture source editor, deep texture editor here, then I know it's got no outputs in the phase, so it's a very simple function. I need to modify this so it's giving me a high output. The only one I've found so far gives a high negative output, so that's what we start with. So it's distance squared minimum, hold the Alt key down, click on 0, set those to 0 just for tidiness sake. It wants to be 3D, and frequency here wants to be -1, which is a little bit fiddly to set sometimes. There you go, -1, and octaves 1. So this is now giving me a very high negative output. To make that a very high positive output, in this second component here, I'll just put that across there and use Sine in this this first one. It doesn't really matter, it doesn't need any octaves, and then just set that to standard. So I've just got an output that's just a positive value, and then if I use difference, that'll give me, because I've got a negative value, so using the difference function from this positive value will give me a very high positive output, which means, after a little bit of fiddling around there, we can drive the diffusion through this, we don't need to colour or bump, it's just through the alpha channel that we're using. We can drive this right up to a very high value, which means it's now super responsive to any light that's in the scene, and the only light that's in the scene is coming from the ambient channel. So now if I give this a quick render, we've got a lot of light. This is still a sort of a grey colour because of the ambient, but now if I hold Alt key down and use this menu, I can reduce the light output to 1 on the ambient channel, which means that it will look essentially black in these dark areas, and now we're getting a high contrast image appearing. So it's a little bit noisy, and to combat that, in the render options for final rendering, I'm going to turn the rays per pixel up to 256, and then we'll give that a render, see what it looks like. It's going to take about 10 minutes to complete, even at this small size, because of the high rays per pixel. And we'll come back to this, and then I'll use Paint Package to invert it when we've got the image and see what it looks like. So there you go, that's the experiment. Right, I'll just pause the video here. So that's that done, and I suppose the question I'm asking here is shadows, if they can generate light like this, is it exactly the opposite situation? If I invert this, will it look like a scene lit from the outside? So I guess we can just try this and go just negative image, and it sort of created a very high contrast version of being lit from the outside, which I suppose makes sense because we're dealing with quite unbalanced settings. So the next question as part of this experiment is, what happens if instead of just producing a white output in these shadow regions, I use a colour? So if I wanted the blocks here to appear red in this area, for example, so if I just select, I think they've got them split into groups here somewhere, so is that the inside or the outside? I think that's the inside. Okay, so if I modify this material and I want them to be red, and this is a negative image, then I need what is the opposite of red in terms of colour. So if I change the diffuse here using this control and use RGB, I want it to be red, so I cut all the red out and make it cyan, and then check out of that. So now this should be sort of glowing cyan in those places. When I invert that, this should appear red, but will it look correct or will it look somehow corrupted? I suppose I should colour a few more things in to create a bit more interest in this scene. So we'll modify Vicky as well. So we'll just see if we can get hold of Vicky. That's a whole body, there you go. And I'll modify her material, and I don't know, I'll choose this colour because I don't know what the opposite of that colour is, and we'll see what result that has. So now there's another thing here that was worth testing, is that still looks white, and that's because the diffuse output is so high, so it might only be possible to produce it in primary and secondary colours, because there she's still appearing more or less white, so there's going to be a limitation. It's not going to be an exact inversion. So I've discovered something else about this. So I can't see any colour tinting on her at all. So if I go back to this now, if I cut the green out, that's going to appear magenta coloured. And no matter what these levels are, if there is a bit of colour, oh, it's Camtasia Studio. Thank you, Camtasia Studio. Right, so even if I cut that down to very low levels, or have one very high and one very low, it probably won't make any difference. That'll be as if it was red. With even though there's only one in the blue, it's being pushed up into magenta. And I suppose the other thing that I'm noticing about this is that the colour is not bleeding across the transition. So even though she's strongly magenta coloured, there's no colour bleed, as you would expect with the True Ambience effect, across to this grey surface, which is again presumably because it's so far out of normal range. So I don't know how this is going to appear. It's not going to look correct in any sense, but it might be an interesting result. So I'll just let this render out. So I'll pause the video here and we'll see what happens when we invert this image. So that's that one rendered out, and so let's quickly go over and invert it and see how it looks. So there you go, that looks a bit odd. She looks like she's glowing green, and these areas, although they've got sort of tinting, are also look like they're glowing red. So it's not like they're coloured, it's like they're lit with ambient. But the True Ambience effect, for the reason that the whole thing's out of kilter because of using such a high diffuse response, is not bringing any colour bleed between these objects and their surrounding ones. So it's like True Ambience with an isolating factor. So right at the start of the video, or close to the start of the video, I did say that one of the deciding factors, and I'll just go back to my original black and white version, in this, because of the way the light gathering method works, is going to be the ray depth here. So the max ray depth, the higher this goes, it's going to allow more interaction with the diffuse surface and it's going to get brighter. So I'll just turn this down and we'll see what happens if I double this value and see if it's going to get significantly brighter in these trapped areas. So this is going to be a higher contrast, I imagine. So let's try it in the opposite direction. Let's do a maximum ray depth of 1 and see what it looks like. I don't know where that doesn't look that much difference actually, which would maximum ray depth would be quite a lot faster. So here's a question. I thought the maximum ray depth was going to be significant. Oh, it's significant at that point, but it doesn't look like it's modifying the effect that much when the surface interaction is taking place. It's difficult to pick out in any detail. What I need is an area where the contrast can spread. So we'll look in that area there, and then I'll increase this significantly. Let's say at 30, that might be quite a slow render. So let's have a go. It didn't look that different there. It's definitely increased the maximum ray depth to 30. It didn't seem to take that much longer to do, which makes me wonder if somehow the effect is bottoming out and we're not getting any continued interaction, which might explain why in the previous version with the colours there was no interaction between the different levels, because somehow it's reaching a clipping point. Because I would have thought with a maximum ray depth of 300, if there was a lot of interaction, it would come to almost a halt. So again, another discovery. I'm going to try boost light and see if that slows it down a lot. So okay, right, so the isolation on the lack of colour bleed is due to the fact that the maximum ray depth is not a significant factor in this render, presumably because it's so far out of range. Once it's had its first reaction, it's dropped below a level where it's causing any kind of response. So in contrary to what I said at the beginning of this video, the maximum ray depth is not a significant factor. So now I've got to wonder, is there any way at which I can bring about an interaction using maximum ray depth to bring it back into range somewhat? So that would mean, can we find a way of mitigating this positive output to some degree? And what I'll do with that is I'll use this is just the empty function there, use average here, and in this function I'll use sine, and I'm going to use the sine value to lower. So I'll set it level and then set it right down and see if I can bring it back into range somehow. So average isn't doing it, so I'll reset that. So multiply with even more extreme approach to reduce the effect. I think I've got a bit of sine function in there still. Now probably when I set this function, I didn't set the frequency to 0. That would mean it was completely flat. Okay, so right, I'll just sort this out, and I know that the spacing on these lines, as it gets wider, means the function's coming back closer to the normal range. So that will be not quite as extreme diffuse output. So let's see what we can see now. Right, that looks still more or less as it was. So it's enough to drive the effect. So now if we use render options and increase this, are we getting any kind of interaction between the levels? Is it slowing it down? No. That's interesting. I'm not quite sure what the significance of that is, but it's interesting. So go back into the material now. If it was just ordinary diffuse level, it would definitely slow it down, I think. Well, if I pop that in anisotrope, it's not going to do anything. Pop it back into ordinary diffuse. Do a quick render here. We've got no output of light, or no significant output, because that was set so low. So we'll set that up so we can see something. Right, so we've got some output now. And what's the render time for this at the current setting? That's a few seconds. There we go. Render options, and I'll increase this now to 400. So that's quite an extreme setting. See if that really slows it down. Yes, that has significantly increased the rendering time, even at this low level setting. So there is some interaction occurring here between the effect and the maximum ray depth. So what I need is, if I bring the ambient right up, is probably to produce a negative diffuse response and pull the light back out. So back in here, we've used difference. So if I just drag those across there and now use multiply here, so that gives us a negative response, and pop that blob in the diffusion, that will pull light out against the ambient response now. So we're getting a different effect coming up here, and you can see it's sort of in range-ish. So now I need more negative response from the diffuse channel. So what I can do here is lift this up, and as the lines, not that one, this one, as the lines get a bit, hang on, I've got hold of the wrong function here, I want hold of that one. There you go, bring the lines in closer together. That'll be more extremely negative now. So that should pull it down a bit further. I'm just trying to get it into a range. Whoops, I didn't want to go there. Where I can see the effect. I can always adjust the output to scale the diffusion output. So it's just nipping backwards and forwards. Surprising that it's not brought it down yet. I might go more extreme. I'll just switch the multiply channel off, so that'll be very high negative effect now, and see how that looks. Oh, I'm surprised at that. Okay, so very high negative diffuse response there with high ambient output, quite noisy. Let's see if render options have been affected by maximum ray depth. Yeah, that's definitely slower, so that is affecting it in that direction. So that is significant for doing it the inverted way around. So obviously there's a clipping at one end and not the other. So let's have a look for the final part of this experiment then, which is probably going on a bit long now, sorry. We'll see how this looks through using this negative diffuse response with an ambient output. So that's looking a bit light. I could reduce some of the ambient output here, perhaps, or is that going to just turn everything grey? There's some lighter areas. That's quite interesting. I probably shouldn't have take that down too far. So I'll offset that. It's brought it down a bit, and I'm also going to increase the maximum ray depth, which is going to increase the render time somewhat. Let's see what at 8 it does. It should increase the contrast. So about 10 minutes again, so that's acceptable for an experiment. So pause the video at this point and we'll see how this looks. So there is a different effect again in this, and I can see there are some black fireflies here, here, and in the hair, which is where presumably the light's got trapped and there's no output coming back to that pixel, even at this sampling rate. And let's have a look here, let's see what the inverted image looks like. So just negative image. So that's interesting. It looks like there's some imaging forming on this surface as well, which is unusual because I was using TA scatter correction. That doesn't usually happen in that way. But then again, we're using an inverted effect, so it might be the diffuse paths that are causing the image to occur there. So the final thing to try in this experiment, so it doesn't go on forever, is go back to a situation where we're going to colour in these cyan and magenta using the same settings as before. I'll see if I can find where they were. That's family 12 there, material. So this channel here, use RGB and cut the red, and we'll see whether the colour bleed effects occurs in this case. So we'll just get hold of all of Vicky, modify her material, and in this case there was no green, 1 blue and 255 red, so that looks like red there. It appeared as a magenta in the previous one, but we're not using the same settings. We're in range now, so that might make a difference. So let's see. Well, I can tell straight away that there are colour bleed effects occurring here, but there are also colour bleed effects and inversion. So this is going to look quite odd again. It's looking a bit similar to the inverted version of, I've still got it hanging around here, this one. So just bring that. There's some sort of correspondence between those two in some sense. So we'll see how that looks. You can see it's magenta here, so it's obviously pushing, it's not red inverted, it's picking up on that small amount of blue and getting pushed by the function. So I'm not really sure what it's going to look like when it's inverted. Also, I'll just let this render out. It's going to take a few minutes yet, and then we'll see what happens, and that then will be the end of the experiment. So no particular conclusions. I'm just hoping to inspire some of you to have a go with these out of range functions and see what kind of weird and wonderful effects you can come up with. Okay, so I'll just pause the video here. So, last render, and as you can see there's quite a bit of noise along this edge where we've got a transition between what looks like a negative and a positive version of the same colour. Also here there's some noise, so that's going to be a bit unfortunate. Let's have a look at the negative image. So we've got the negative image there, so now this has appeared magenta even though it was predominantly red, so obviously the out of range nature of the function, either negative or positive, is going to make it difficult to get anything other than primary colours, red, green, blue, or colours which are combinations of primary colours but with an absence of one, so that will be yellow, magenta and cyan. And obviously it's going to work with black and white, but anything in between that is probably going to be a bit of a struggle. So here we go, I've got a selection of strange effects that you can achieve using this out of range function, some of which look quite good and some of which just look quite odd. So I hope you found that interesting and that you'll have a go at experimenting with this function yourself and maybe come up with something new for your renders. Okay then, that's the end of the video. Cheers now.